He sat down like he was about to do something noble. You could almost feel the air tighten. Christine was calm, collected, but there was a steel in her eyes. And sitting right beside her was David, her husband, a man who had nothing to do with the years-long mess that was Kody and Christine's collapsed relationship. Yet here he was, caught in a moment he never asked for. And then, Kody spoke. The second he opened his mouth, it was clear this wasn't going to be any ordinary apology. He looked at Christine and told her he was sorry. Sorry for saying he never loved her. And as those words left his mouth, his voice wavered not with grief or understanding, but confusion, defensiveness. That strange tone that says, I don't fully believe I've done anything wrong, but here's the apology you want. Christine didn't flinch. David blinked, slightly. Everyone watching from their couches leaned forward. Because what kind of man apologizes to his ex-wife for saying he never loved her, while sitting in front of the new man holding her heart? It wasn't just awkward. It was jarring, unsettling, and a little insulting. There's a difference between closure and performance. And this felt like performance. Because instead of owning the pain he created, Kody fumbled into poetic nonsense about storms and sunsets, about how their love, while maybe broken in the end, was once beautiful. But here's the thing. Beautiful to who? He said, our experience was special, like a storm, like a sunset. His voice softened, almost dreamlike, like he was describing a love song from another life. And Christine. She sat almost still, hearing the words, but not absorbing them. Because if you've lived through pain, you know the difference between a genuine apology and a sweet-sounding manipulation. He brought up years of memories like they were shared treasures, but they weren't treasures for her. They were bruises she carried, quietly, painfully, for decades. And now, after she's found a man who truly values her presence, her heart, her worth, here comes Kody, suddenly shining light on memories he once dismissed. It was hard not to feel the tension crawl up your arms, because the way he looked at Christine wasn't regret, it wasn't apology. It was like he wanted her to join him in remembering their time together as something it wasn't. Like he needed her to validate that not everything between them was bad. But that's not what apologies are for. If you're Christine, where do your eyes go during something like this? Your former husband telling you that, yes, he didn't love you, but still, somehow, those years were magical. Do you look at him? Do you look away? Or do you do what Christine did, sit still, keep grace on your face, and let the truth hang silently in the room? It was David's face that said what many of us were thinking. He barely spoke, but his body did. Slight nods, long blinks, and maybe a small breath that said, what universe did I step into? You could see how wrong the whole setup was. You could feel how disrespectful it was, not just to Christine, stretched between her past and her peace, but to David, asked to witness something no husband should have to. And when you think the strangest part has passed, Kody takes it a step further. He starts reminiscing about things that didn't happen. He talks about effort, about intention, about love he showed. But if you've been watching for years, really watching, you know that love wasn't shown. Not the kind Christine deserved. Because love isn't withholding affection as punishment. It's not ignoring your wife when she's pregnant. It's not failing to show up for surgeries or big moments. And love isn't playing favorites while pretending every family member is equal under one roof. When someone apologizes, you expect acknowledgement of your pain, responsibility, maybe even recognition of the imbalance that destroyed so much trust. But this apology, if we can even call it that, it felt like the kind that shifts the center, puts the blame in the shadows, covers the cracks with nice words and nothing more. Christine didn't cry, she didn't argue, she didn't even need to say much, because sometimes silence speaks volumes, and in that silence what she didn't say said everything. She knows who he is now, and she knows who she was back then, someone who trusted too long, stayed too quiet, and carried too much. This wasn't healing. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't even decency. It was a man trying to explain away his mistakes with metaphors, sitting between a woman who survived him and a man who replaced him, and somehow still expecting grace. But it gets worse, because what he says next changes everything. Last week's episode cracked something wide open. For the first time in a long time, we didn't just see the broken pieces of a relationship, we saw Kody trying to glue history back together with words that didn't fit. It started with him sitting across from Christine and David, almost like a spectator in his own undoing, and saying out loud, on camera, to the woman he shared decades and 6 children with, I never loved you. And then, even more jarring, he tried to follow that with flattery disguised as closure. It came out of nowhere. Not because we hadn't seen the cracks, we've watched this marriage slowly unravel over seasons. But the way he said it, cold and rehearsed, almost clinical. Like he was diagnosing something instead of apologizing for it. I never loved you, just like that. No preface, no lead-in, no cushion. And right there, in front of her husband, the man she rebuilt herself with, he just dropped it like a casual truth. As if it wasn't cruel, as if it wasn't humiliating. But it wasn't the first time Kody had made Christine feel invisible, it was just the most blunt. For years, we've seen her try. We've watched her beg, not with words but with effort, little gestures, emotional invitations. And Kody, whether through indifference or pride, always kept her at arm's length. Like love was something she had to earn, something handed out if she behaved just right, just enough. And now here he was, all these years later, trying to soften the blow by calling their time together poetic. He said there were storms and sunsets. That it was like a beautiful life lesson wrapped in hardship. But Christine didn't need a metaphor, she needed honesty. When you tell someone you never loved them, you're not offering clarity. You're attempting to erase everything they believed was real. And then to throw in that soft, almost romantic reflection? That's not an apology. That's a contradiction. Because what is more cruel than telling someone the home they built, the years they gave, and the children they raised with you were all tethered to a lie, while nodding and calling it special? He tried to make it sound like wisdom, like perspective, but it rang hollow. Because if you watched season 1 all the way through to now, you know exactly what Christine went through. The isolation, the subtle digs, the constant competition for love and attention that, no matter what she did, she never got back. And now, standing in front of the one person who does see her, she has to sit through one final performance. Her silence wasn't because she agreed, it was a choice. Christine chose not to let his revisionist memory pull her under again. This is what Kody doesn't seem to understand. Silence doesn't mean acceptance. And forgiveness doesn't equal forgetfulness. Christine's grace wasn't an open door to rewrite the story. It was proof she'd moved past needing validation from him at all. He still doesn't get why she left. That's the part that stings the most for her. You can see it in the way she looks down when he speaks, like she's exhausted by having to mentally defend her right to leave, all over again, even after all this time. And when he calls their once loveless marriage beautiful, it's like a second knife. Because it wasn't beautiful. Not for her. Not during those unbearable moments when she sat in her home waiting for a husband who never showed up. Not when she felt last in every decision. Not when he shamed her for speaking up and labeled her as dramatic or emotional or ungrateful, for simply wanting a connection with the man she gave her life to. Kody keeps saying he just wanted to live the principle of plural marriage, as if that's an excuse. But what about the principle of being fully present? The principle of protecting someone you made vows to? He doesn't address the damage, only the parts of the journey he found meaningful. And then, as if the words weren't jarring enough, he even suggests that maybe things weren't really that bad at all. That maybe Christine's pain was exaggerated, misremembered, that maybe, just maybe, she didn't see things the right way, but the audience saw them. We saw the way he pulled away. We saw the way she cried alone in her confessionals. And no matter how poetic he tries to make it now, you can't cover years of emotional absence with a soft voice and a metaphor. And when he says, "I wasn't the victim," it almost sounds like growth, until you realize he's saying it to Christine like she should be relieved. Like that line should clear their history, but it doesn't, because apologies only heal when they're rooted in truth, and Kody's truth felt carefully shaped to avoid accountability. Still, what he says next, it doesn't untangle the mess. It only deepens it. And this time, even David reaches his limit. There's a way Kody speaks where you start to feel like he's trying to hypnotize the conversation. Not own it, not heal it, rewrite it. Sitting across from Christine and David, in what was already an uncomfortable and emotionally loaded moment, Kody begins floating through what he calls the beautiful moments of their marriage. And Christine sits there, jaw tight, eyes cautious, listening to a version of their life that she has no memory of. Because what he's describing isn't what happened. He's not recalling their truth, he's selling a fantasy. Right after telling her flat out that he never loved her, he almost immediately contradicted himself, suggesting their connection was special, full of light and growth, that they shared something sacred, that their life together was, his words, beautiful like a storm and a sunset. And I have to stop you there, because when someone calls your trauma a sunset, they're not healing you, they're comforting themselves. Christine wasn't hearing the words of someone reaching out in repentance. She was hearing someone who still refuses to accept the damage he left behind. It's a strange thing, watching a man try to pretty up abandonment. Like if he says it gently enough, it might erase the nights she cried alone, or the years she raised children under the shadow of being emotionally neglected. And the thing is, this felt familiar. If you've been watching Sister Wives for any length of time, you've seen this pattern. Kody talks in loops. He makes statements wrapped in soft language, all while avoiding any real weight of the pain he caused. He talks about we, when the truth is the we had shattered long before Christine walked away. Meanwhile, David sat still, quiet, watching, but you could see in his posture exactly how tense the air got. His leg bounced for a second too long. His hand flexed at one point on the couch, and you had to wonder, what is going through his mind right now? A man sits across from him, trying to romanticize a broken marriage to his wife. Is this delusion, a complete lack of shame? Or is Kody simply so far removed from the truth that he believes every word coming out of his mouth? Christine, bless her strength, didn't feed into it. She didn't argue. She didn't roll her eyes or challenge the story, but her reaction made it clearer than anything else. She doesn't recognize what he's describing, because the love he's talking about, the ease, the light, the shared tenderness, it wasn't real. Or if it was buried so far beneath his resentment, his other priorities, that she rarely had access to it. And here's the thing about remembering, you can't remember only the parts that benefit you and call that the truth. An honest apology means you recall what they felt too, not just what you wish they did. It's easy to call a sunset beautiful when you never had to sit through the storm alone. Easy to call it poetry from the comfort of your own healing while the other person is still sweeping up glass. Christine isn't angry, she's past anger. That's the real shift here. She's no longer trying to explain how much he hurt her. She knows he saw it, and if he didn't, that's on him. Her face doesn't light up when he says sentimental things. Her eyes don't soften. She just listens, nods occasionally, but stays ice steady because she knows what he's doing. He's not apologizing. He's crafting a memory he can live with. There's a moment near the middle of that conversation where Christine flicks her eyes toward David. Not long, just long enough. It reads like, "Do you hear this?" And David doesn't flinch. That allyship, that emotional partnership, that's what makes the whole thing even more uncomfortable to watch. Kody's trying to reclaim something that's already been buried, while David is standing in the present, fully grounded in respect. Protecting peace while Kody clumsily tiptoes around the truth. And the worst part is, Kody might truly believe what he's saying, which means this isn't strategy, this is emotional blindness. A man standing in the ashes of a home he helped burn down, smiling, and calling it a warm fire. But the reality he's forgetting is one the audience never will. Because we've watched Christine slowly lose herself in that marriage. And we watched her climb out. So when he talks about love and light, we know better. And in a moment where Kody should have shown humility, should have owned his part with full weight, he tried instead to romanticize the rubble. And that's not healing. That's denial dressed up as poetry. And just when you think the twisting of words has reached its limit, Christine finally speaks. And what she says next, it cuts through all the noise. You don't need to raise your voice to reclaim your power. You don't need to cry or curse or even explain. Sometimes, the loudest declaration of worth is contained in stillness. And that's exactly what Christine gave Kody in those long, awkward, painful moments. She sat upright, composed, and completely unimpressed. The apology, if we can even call it that, kept unraveling in front of her, filled with half-truths and mismatched metaphors. And yet she didn't give him what he was hoping for. Not a tear, not a smile, not even validation. All she gave him was silence. She didn't fall into the trap, that deep, sticky place where you start questioning your own memories because someone's sitting in front of you trying to reshape them. Christine knew better. After years of being told she was too emotional, too rebellious, too difficult, she learned the hard way that speaking up wasn't always listened to, but ignoring, that she couldn't take anymore. So now, faced with her past trying to charm its way into peace, she sits still, calm but completely shut. And beside her, David isn't rattled. He's not shifting in his seat or looking away. You can tell he recognizes what's happening, a man desperate to soften his wrongdoings by spinning them into poetry. David doesn't interrupt, he doesn't challenge, he doesn't even need to posture. But his presence alone speaks volumes. It steadies Christine. It frames her silence not as discomfort, but as confidence. A quiet refusal to entertain a lie one more time. Kody keeps talking. He keeps looking at Christine like hoping she'll break, like maybe she'll smile and say, "Yeah, it was hard, but there were good times too." But he doesn't get that flicker from her, not this time. Because this is what freedom looks like, a woman who's no longer trapped in someone else's version of the truth. And that's when it begins to settle on Kody's face. That realization. Not a wrecking ball moment, but something colder, sadder. It's recognition. That he's not just talking to Christine anymore, he's talking to a version of her that no longer exists. The soft Christine. The pleasing Christine. The Christine who kept hoping he'd finally look at her the way she needed. That woman's gone, and the one sitting in her place, she doesn't need him to say anything anymore. Christine doesn't blink when Kody waxes poetic. She doesn't reach for understanding when he talks about regret. And the more she holds her silence, the more obvious it becomes, this is not a woman holding back. It's a woman who's finally let go, and that unnerves him, because now her power is unmistakable. She's not quiet because she's broken, she's quiet because she's healed, and David sees it. You can tell by the way he slightly leans in at one point, like a signal that says, "I got you, we're good," and she knows it too. That she never needed a voice to defend her pain. But when she found someone who didn't ignore it, that changed everything. There's a small shift in Kody's tone halfway through. It's subtle, but you can hear it. A little less certainty, a little more grasping. It's what happens when someone realizes they're speaking to the past, and they're the only one still in it. Christine doesn't correct him. She doesn't fish for anything deeper. She just lets him drown in his own words. And that's what made the moment so powerful. It wasn't explosive. It didn't need to be. Because when someone who's hurt you tries to pretend the hurt wasn't that bad, and you don't even flinch, that's how you show them they no longer hold power. Kody sat across from someone who used to smile at crumbs. Now she's feeding herself full plates of love, of truth, of peace. And David? He doesn't compete. He doesn't shrink. He simply stands next to her, as an equal, knowing full well that letting her take back her story in silence was stronger than anything he could say. And what little power Kody thought he still had fades. Right there, in that quiet, awkward room, with the cameras still rolling, Christine took back everything he ever tried to erase by saying nothing at all. And then, Kody asks the question no one was expecting. Not David. Definitely not Christine. A weak, baffling attempt to gain control again. And what he says next leaves the room colder than ever. You could feel it in David's posture. That quiet awareness, that stillness that comes not from nerves, but from calculated control. He didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. He didn't roll his eyes or shift in his seat like most men might when their wife's ex starts talking about love, beauty, and a poetic past. He simply watched, fully present, entirely composed. And maybe that's what made it all so powerful. Because Kody didn't expect grace, especially not from the man who now holds everything he once took for granted. There's something almost surreal about watching a man sit through an apology that isn't really his to hear, yet still affects him deeply. And for David, that's exactly what this was. He wasn't looking for closure. He wasn't navigating regret. He was being pulled into a narrative he had no hand in creating. A front row seat to emotional chaos that didn't belong to him, yet still surrounded his present. But the way David held the room, it changed everything. Kody, as usual, made the moment about himself. Every word he dropped was laced with tones of self-reflection that sounded more like excuses. He tried to paint his mistakes as growth. He tried to wrap wrongdoing in philosophical insight, but while he spoke, David didn't bite, he didn't challenge or coddle, he listened. Firm, steady, unbreakable. There was no competition in his energy, no fight in his silence, and that unnerved Kody more than any outburst ever could. Most men wouldn't have the patience to sit through that. To hear another man talk about their wife's past, her pain, their supposedly beautiful connection and not step in. But David, he knew Christine didn't need rescuing, and that's why his presence hit so deep, because it wasn't loud. It was secure. It said, "You don't need to say anything, I'm here, I see the truth, and I trust you to handle this in your way." That silent respect, that's what Kody never understood. You saw it in Kody's face, he was waiting. Waiting for some kind of spark, maybe for David to shut him down, or at least shift uncomfortably, or give him a pass. But David didn't react. He let the silence stretch. Let Kody swing on the rope of his own words until it became obvious what this really was, a desperate appeal for emotional recognition, disguised as an apology. Kody wanted approval. Not forgiveness, not honesty, approval. Maybe not from David personally, but from the room. From Christine. But the more he talked, the more tangled he became. He lost control over the moment, and David never reached for it. Instead, he let Kody do exactly what he needed to do, over-explain himself right into a corner. And just when the tension seemed like it might plateau, Kody looked to David and said it. Right out loud. Would you like an apology too? And that's where everything froze. Not because of the offer, but because of the audacity underneath. What was he apologizing for? For being in the room? For past disrespect? For talking about Christine like she was still his? David blinked once, let it hang in the air. And then, slowly but directly, he said exactly what Christine couldn't say at the moment, not with anger, not with bravado, but with clean, chilling truth. He said, I don't need anything from you, this isn't about me, this is about the way you chose to treat her, not just then, but now, this moment proves you still don't see her. Christine looked at him then. It was small, a glance. But heavy, because in that one sentence, David stepped in, not as a protector, not as a husband, but as a mirror, reflecting back the reality that Kody spent years avoiding. And Kody didn't know what to do with that. Because it was the first moment he couldn't frame, couldn't spin, couldn't dress in calm poetic language. David had handled him without touching him, had disarmed him without raising a voice. And most of all, reminded him that Christine didn't need to say anything, because she was finally with someone who would. What comes next is the breakdown of the narrative Kody's clung to for years. And this time, it's not just Christine taking back her truth. It's her peace walking out in front of her, holding her hand, without ever needing to shout. Every time Kody opens his mouth to reflect, it's like watching someone try to paint over mold with pretty wallpaper. He speaks in these vague, romantic metaphors. He talks about the past like it was some beautiful, heartbreaking novel they both once lived through together. But the thing is, we saw those pages. We were there. Season after season, year after year, we watched the real story unfold. And what he's trying to sell now as a bittersweet love story, that's not what happened at all. Kody doesn't just rewrite history. He erases the parts that make him uncomfortable. He throws phrases around like, we made mistakes, or it was complicated, or there were storms and sunsets. But he never actually owns what kind of storm he was. Because Christine, she didn't just walk away from a bad season. She left after years of being dismissed, overlooked, minimized, and emotionally starved. And the footage doesn't lie. Go back to season 3, when Christine was trying to explain how alone she felt. How she'd stand in the kitchen, smiling through her pain, trying to keep the family moving, while he gave everything to his newest wife, Robin. You could watch her face fall every time Kody chose someone else instead of showing up for her. And yet now, he sits across from her, as if they shared some grand, tragic love that was just too complex to last. No, it wasn't too complex, it was too one-sided. Remember that moment when Christine tried to open up about not feeling supported when their daughter was going through surgery? And Kody, instead of acknowledging his absence, focused on how he felt hurt by Christine's reaction. Everything came back to his experience. His version. Someone always misunderstanding him. But what about Christine's experience? What about her needing more than just his regret-packed monologues? And then there's the infamous line, the one she never forgot. When he said he wasn't attracted to her. That wasn't a slip-up. That was a wound on national television. And he knew it. And now, years later, he's trying to squeeze sentiment out of a marriage he abandoned emotionally long before it ever ended legally. Kody talks about not vetting Christine before marrying her. As if that somehow absolves him. As if she was a bad choice, not a woman who deserved better from the start. But Christine, she loved him. Unconditionally, deeply, fully, she gave him everything. And he gave her the bare minimum while always expecting her gratitude in return. And look, people fall out of love. That happens. But what makes this so painful to watch is how Kody doesn't even seem to remember how cruel he was. Not because he's choosing denial out of grief, but because he's completely detached from the damage he's done. He's trying to reshape the narrative right in front of the woman, still carrying the scar tissue from it. Christine didn't call it out. She didn't drag him through the moments we all remember. But we do. We saw her tear up in confessionals, season after season. We watched her question the foundation of a belief system that allowed her to stay unloved for decades. We heard her admit that sometimes, she felt like a basement wife, forgotten, hidden, less than. And now, Kody wants to pretend they shared something profound. He says he was lost, that he wanted to live the principle, that he just wanted to do his best. But his best often meant Christine got what was left of him, not the best of him. That's not poetry. That's survival dressed up as a love letter. And while he's trying to craft this clean, retrospective story, hoping maybe cameras will catch him in some kind of noble light, Christine is doing something far more honest. She's listening without responding. Because she knows the truth doesn't need repeating. It already aired. Kody might hope we forget the past. But how can we, when every scene, every look, every silence already told the story louder than his monologues ever could? What he doesn't realize is, the story is already written. And Christine, she's not going back to reread it. Because the next chapter didn't include him. And for once, Kody can't control the rewrite. Because this time, reality is louder than his version. And David is about to remind him again. From the very beginning, Christine tried to speak up. Her feelings were soft at first, gentle frustrations, subtle sadness, quiet disappointment. But even back in the early seasons, you could see the start of something unraveling. Her smiles didn't quite reach her eyes. Her laughter, while frequent, often felt like a cover. And when she did finally say something real, it was either brushed off or turned back on her. That's the part that's hardest to forget. And maybe Kody thinks people don't remember. Maybe he assumes fans have moved on or blurred the early years of the show. But the truth is, this pain wasn't hidden. It was documented. Hours and hours of footage showing a woman trying, truly trying, to find her place in a marriage that never gave her a fighting chance. Every time Christine shared doubts or confusion, she was met with sarcasm, dismissal, emotional shutdown. There was that moment years ago when she voiced how excluded she felt from the family decisions. And Kody, instead of taking her seriously, laughed it off, said she was overreacting. Then there was that infamous moment when she brought up being uncomfortable with Ken, Kody's friend, suggesting he shed wives and rejoin mainstream faith. And instead of defending her, validating that hurt, Kody made a joke, about her feelings in front of the entire group. That bruised her. You could see it. Over time, it added up. And what made it worse was how often he'd double back with backhanded logic. Kody didn't just ignore Christine's pain, he blamed her for it. He told her directly that if she were easier to love, more respectful, less negative, then things might be different. He shaped her hurt into a personality flaw. Not his failure, hers. This wasn't a short fall from grace. It was a slow erosion of trust, affection, partnership. Christine didn't leave because of one bad month or one ugly argument. She left after 2 decades of being placed last. And somewhere around the middle point of that journey, she realized something chilling, that no matter how hard she tried, how well she loved, how fiercely she showed up, Kody never saw her. Not really. And when someone doesn't see you, no apology can fix that. Especially when it comes years too late, wrapped in metaphor, lacking any real awareness of everything that came before. So when Kody sat across from her, saying he never loved her but that it was all still beautiful, he wasn't reaching for forgiveness. He was reaching to soften his image. And Christine knew that, because real apologies name the sin. They name the damage in full. And if Kody had truly wanted to own it, he wouldn't have focused on the poetry. He would have remembered the pregnancy when she felt invisible. He would have mentioned the times she sat alone during holidays. He would have acknowledged how he praised other wives in front of her while dismissing her in the same breath. And here's a point that cuts deeper than most people realize. Christine was struggling with plural marriage from the start. This wasn't a belief she gave up late in the game. It's something she expressed concern about in season 1. She once said, "I don't know if I believe in this anymore." And that was treated like a character flaw instead of a spiritual crisis. Instead of Kody asking why, he pulled away even more. He didn't meet her in her confusion. He watched her drown in it. And what's haunting now is how none of this was hidden. Kody said these things on camera, over years. He accused her of being difficult. He told her she wasn't desirable. He played the victim while ignoring how Christine held their family up when he was too busy shooting down complaints that didn't align with his ideal version of plural perfection. So now, when he sits calmly in front of her and tries to rewrite that story, it's not just insulting, it's terrifying in its oblivion. Because what he's saying sorry for isn't the half of what went wrong. In fact, he's not saying sorry for the things we know hurt her the most. And that's the part that twists the knife for viewers. Because we remember, we saw it all. So when he tries to close this chapter with soft-spoken regrets and no real depth, we don't see a man giving an apology. We see a man avoiding the truth, hoping time and distance have erased what we all know never disappeared. And Christine, she's done hoping he'll get it. She's facing a man who watched her hurt for years, called that hurt messy, and now wants credit for acknowledging it too late. But what comes next? For once, Christine is the one who speaks without needing permission. And no reshaped memory can prepare Kody for what's about to land. Kody has spent years building his identity around the principle of plural marriage, often using religion as the foundation for every choice, judgment, and excuse. But the deeper you look at how he wields his faith, the more it starts to fracture. He preaches unity, but treats each wife with entirely different standards. He speaks of obedience, but only when it benefits him. And what becomes clear, season after season, is that Kody's belief system works best when he's the one defining the rules. He's quoted scripture so many times it almost starts to sound rehearsed. Biblical submission, eternal families, the celestial kingdom, these are the phrases he leans on when challenged. And for a while, it seemed to work. Especially early on, when the family was still wrapped tightly in the structure of shared belief. But over time, as the fractures began to form, Kody kept pointing to the principle, even as he walked further and further away from its core values. He talks about sacrifice, but sacrifices nothing. He wants devotion, but offers no fairness. He refers to God's will when it suits whatever decision he's already made. And the biggest contradiction of all, he expected all his wives to submit to his spiritual leadership without ever truly leading with love. Because real spiritual leadership doesn't demand silence. It doesn't dismiss emotion. It doesn't rank wives by obedience or punish the ones who asked too many questions. It requires listening, compassion, and accountability. Things that were in short supply anytime Christine tried to speak her truth. And it's telling that when Christine began to drift from belief in plural marriage, Kody didn't meet her with grace. He shamed her. He resented her. He questioned her loyalty. But not once did he step in and ask what part of the faith had failed her. Because to Kody, her doubts weren't spiritual, they were rebellious, personal, disrespectful. The truth is, his relationship with faith always seemed centered around control. Christine was praised when she aligned with his beliefs, and marginalized the moment she didn't. And when other wives challenged his authority in different ways, he met them with the same bitterness, whether it was Janelle's independence or Mary's emotional distance. The message was clear: obedience was holiness, obedience was love. Anything else was betrayal. But that's not what faith is, not the kind he claims to follow. If you strip away the complicated layers of fundamentalism, what does faith actually require? Love your wife, honor her, stand by her in hardship, encourage her spiritual journey, don't crush it, and above all, humility. The ability to say, "I was wrong," without needing to sound like a prophet explaining suffering. Kody could quote God all day long. But the God he referenced doesn't seem to be the same God asking for kindness, for honesty, for respect. And now, years later, he stands in front of Christine trying to cover the emotional wreckage with a soft theological blanket, unable to see that the hole wasn't in her faith, it was in his leadership. This is the consequence of bending scripture around ego. It doesn't bring people closer to truth, it makes them run from it. And Christine, she didn't walk away from belief, she walked away from how he lived it. The saddest part is, even now, he still doesn't see the difference. Kody always seemed to think Christine needed closure. That maybe, if he showed up with the right tone, the right words, he could nudge the door open just enough to rewrite how she sees their past. But what he never realized, and what becomes painfully obvious in that final moment, is that closure isn't his to give. Christine already found it. Long before the cameras sat them down in that room. She doesn't yell. She doesn't dig up old arguments or recite a list of everything he did wrong. She doesn't need to, because her power doesn't come from proving a point. It comes from peace, real peace. And when someone has truly moved on, there's nothing more unnerving to the person who lost them than silence. That's what Kody got from Christine in the end. Calm, cool clarity, unbothered, explained, closed. He tried again to spin something gentle. He told her he had regrets, that he wanted to honor what they had, that he viewed their relationship as something worthy of mourning, and it all sounded like it should matter. The cadence, the emotion in his voice, he wanted it to land deep. But not every apology finds a home. And Christine, she didn't even flinch, not out of coldness, but out of knowing too much. Living too long inside a relationship where her voice echoed but was never heard, she didn't leave curious, she didn't leave bitter, she left full, and that's why Kody's words fell flat. She looked at him, steady, respectful, even kind, but so clearly disconnected. As if the emotional strings had already been cut long ago, and now she was just watching someone else rearrange the story. And when he paused, searching her face for something, maybe agreement, maybe emotion, she gave him exactly what he feared: stillness. Nothing more, because there was nothing more to say. And that's when David stepped in once again, not dramatically, not with dominance, but with certainty. He didn't puff out his chest. He didn't try to compete. He simply made it clear that this was a moment for letting go, not holding on. That whatever version of Christine Kody kept trying to talk to, she no longer existed. And the woman beside him, she was no longer Kody's responsibility to make sense of. David held space without taking it. You could see how comfortable Christine was with him there. She didn't shrink, didn't hesitate, she was grounded. Kody, he searched the room like he was still owed something. A gesture, a thank you, maybe even a quiet nod that said, "You're right, parts of it were good." But no such thing came. Just an understanding, spoken without words, that this chapter had closed long ago, and that nothing he said could change how it ended. Christine stood up when it was over, calmly, gracefully, and without pause. No dramatic exit. No emotional breakdown. Because that's not how grounded people leave hurt anymore. That's how survivors walk away once they've finally stopped carrying the burden of someone else's version of the truth. Behind her, Kody was still sitting. Still thinking. Still trying to piece together why his words didn't bring the closure he wanted. But she never looked back. And that silence, that final goodbye, said more than anything else ever could. There's a kind of quiet that comes after the final word is spoken. Not awkward, not empty, just done. That was the feeling in the room as Christine stood, poised and composed, while Kody lingered. Still in that old space, still unsure what just happened. It's like he didn't realize how far gone Christine really was, how much ground had been covered without him. He walked into this moment thinking there might still be some piece of the past left to hold on to. A thread, a crack, something. But what he found was a woman who had already turned the last page. He walked away slower than he arrived, his face stuck somewhere between confused and unsatisfied. Maybe in his mind, this was supposed to feel healing. Maybe he believed that being present, saying a few heartfelt things, would be enough to prove growth. But what Kody never understood is that real healing doesn't come from grand speeches delivered too late. It comes from who you were when it counted, how you showed up when someone was still hoping you would. Christine is no longer hoping. She's living. David didn't need to put a stamp on the moment. His quiet strength wasn't performative. It was centered around one thing: honoring Christine's space. And if Kody had truly understood what respect looked like, he would have seen that as the measure. Not how eloquently he could describe their past, but how little space he gave her in it when it truly mattered. This wasn't about bitterness. Christine didn't walk away angry, she walked away complete. For years, she'd waited for that one moment where she could say, "I was worthy all along." But now she doesn't need to say it out loud. Because every step forward, every decision to protect her own peace, every second spent in a space where she's fully seen, that says it for her. And maybe that's why the ending hits harder than the apology itself. Because Kody still believed there was healing left to happen, and he missed that Christine had already healed. Herself, without fanfare, without needing his permission. And for the audience, it wasn't about whether the apology sounded perfect or not. It was about what never came with it. No ownership of what was actually broken. No acknowledgement of the weight she carried alone. No real regret. Just vague sadness and poetic language masking a history made up of missed chances and misused power. What Christine gave us wasn't drama. It was an example of what it looks like to close the door on someone who never truly saw you and walk forward into something that finally makes sense. Whether you believe in plural marriage or not, the truth doesn't change. Every person deserves to be chosen fully, clearly, daily. And Kody, he chose too late, spoke too softly, understood too little. So when Christine walked out of that room, she wasn't just leaving an awkward apology behind. She was closing the door for good. No more explanations, no more hoping he'd change. That chapter of her life no longer needed editing or permission. It was over. Finally, what did you feel when you saw that apology? If someone from your past tried to tell you there was beauty in the pain they caused, would you accept it? Or shut it down like Christine did? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your truth.